Well, first of all, I want to thank Pepper, and I want to thank all of you for being here today, but especially for giving me a chance to plan this very, very fun speech, Planning for a Bright Future. How much more exciting can it be than that? Especially since I know, from having worked with over 60 mothers to put this book together, that our children do have a bright future. If you haven't had a chance to look at the book, I broke the book into 3 sections. The first section is discovery. The second section is support. But the last section is a section I wanted somebody to hand me when Alex's heart defect was diagnosed, and it's called Hope. And there is a great deal of hope for our children, but it's up to us to help them make the most of it. So what I did was I provided some handouts for you that have tips for, it has 10 different tips for 3 different stages of development. I'm not going to go over all of those. You can read those on your own. I'm just going to go through my favorite things for you. And the first one is so funny. Nicole, I was looking at your handouts. I found this picture on the internet, and it's also in one of the handouts you gave me. Is that not an awesome picture of reading to your child? To me, this is one of the very most important things that we do. Unlike heart-healthy children, our children do not have consecutive minutes, hours, and days of learning, because our children may be on paralyzing drugs. Our children may be tied to a bed so they won't pull their IVs out. Our children are going to be sedated for the surgeries they have. And sometimes they have to even be put into a coma-like situation until their body stabilizes. This is not normal. And children who are heart healthy don't have these circumstances to have to live with. They have many, many consecutive minutes, days, and hours of learning. And so our children are at risk. Just because they have this heart defect, it puts them at risk. And one of the great things they're at risk for is developing language and communication skills. And my bachelor's degree is in speech pathology. So I knew that if my child were to have difficulties with speech and communication, he was probably going to have academic problems as well. And one thing that I could do to prevent that, or at least make it as minimal as possible, was to read to my child. And so we read and read and read when I was pregnant. We read and read and read after I had the baby. And even though Alexander is 14 years old now, and he is an avid reader, we read out loud to each other every day. I'm a homeschool mom, and we have literature. Right now we're reading one of the Children of the Lamp books. Have you all heard of those? They're awesome. You have to read Children of the Lamp. It's a series of books. And if your kids love magic, Aladdin, anything like that, they're going to love that series. You don't have to stop sharing books with your children just because they can read themselves. Here's one of the other things that we have to do if we want our children to have a bright future. We want to play with our children. I even have a picture of kids out there kicking the ball. Just because your son or your daughter has a heart defect doesn't mean you can't get outside and be physical with them, unless a cardiologist says otherwise. My experience with a cardiologist has been that when your child is young especially, they are self-limiting. If they can't go any further, they'll just plop down. And I know it because I saw Alexander plop down enough times, and then once he felt good enough, he would he would jump right back up and he would join in the fray again. We want to play with our children and we want to have fun with them. It doesn't always have to be physical. My kids love board games. How many of you have played Candyland? Chutes and Ladders? Don't they love to see Mom go all the way back to the beginning? Yeah, it's a good thing to get those board games out. And when it's raining, and here in Florida you all get a lot of rainy days, it's great to bring out those board games. You can play catch with your kid. Play with your children. Alexander loves chess, and he belongs to a chess club. There are so many different games, and you can get those old games out like checkers and Old Maid. That's a great way not only to entertain your child, but you're teaching your child communication skills. They're getting that back and forth communication, and they learn a sense of consequences. If I do this, then that will happen. Here's how I beat Mom. Here's how I beat Dad or Big Brother. So there are so many different skills you learn just through play. I love this photo. Sing to your child, especially when your child is a baby. How many of you sing to your baby? You might not let anyone else hear you, but you let your baby hear you? Yes, because that comes from our heart. And here again, we're dealing with language. They understand the rhythm of our language. They feel the love coming from our heart. And it doesn't just have to be Mommy. Big sister can sing. Big brother can. I don't remember my son Joey singing to Alex a whole lot, but he loved to do patty cake. And he loved to do wheels on the bus. Did y'all do this with your kid? Where you put them on the floor and you pump their little legs for being the wheels on the bus and their arms over the windshield wipers? Those are great activities for us to do with our children. And guess what? We're sneaking in physical therapy and they don't even know it. So these are great things that we can do to prepare our children to have a bright future. Please no baby Einstein. And I know the cardiologist is going to agree with me here because the American Academy of Pediatrics has said that no children, heart healthy or otherwise, should be in front of a monitor, a television screen, a computer before the age of 2. And I know the mother who put this together was wanting to share her love of music and art and culture, and I think that's great. But our children don't need it before they're 2 years old. And then even after they're 2, not for more than about an hour a day. Helping us sort laundry is more important to them. Helping us set the table for dinner may not seem very entertaining, but that's a better skill for them to learn than to plop them in front of the television. So I really want to strongly encourage you to limit your exposure to computers and TV when they're really young. When they get older, there's more of a place for it. When they're really young, we don't want to do that. This is one of my favorite photos also, especially the little girls in the middle. It's important to let them dance. You know how I talked to you about Alexander and me having to trust him with the karate? Well, you have to trust him when it comes to dance too, and I know the cardiologist is going to say it's okay to let them dance, especially when they're young. When you're like those little girls in the middle, they're self-limiting, okay? If they can't do it, they won't do it, but they sure will have fun trying. And we want to encourage them. I never realized how important this was until last year. Last year I went to the Body, Mind, and Spirit conference for adults with congenital heart defects in Boston. And while I was there, a woman named Donna came up to talk to all of us. And she was near her 40s. She's in her late 30s. And she said, I was born before there was a surgery to help me. So I have uncorrected transposition of the great vessels. And she said, my parents were told that they had no idea what my future would be. I wasn't allowed to get upset. Does this sound familiar? I wasn't allowed to be disciplined. But the worst thing was, I wasn't allowed to dance. Her best friend's mother was a dance teacher. And all the little girls in her neighborhood after school would go over for dance lessons, except for Donna. Donna had to walk home, and she wasn't allowed to dance. And she said that even today, she feels like a klutz, and she blames her parents for not letting her dance. Well, do you know, the very next speaker was a young woman named Tanya, who was half her age. And she came up to the podium, and she was all excited. She said, I'm 19 years old, and I'm in college, and guess what? I'm taking a dance class. And she said, I had tetralogy of Fallot, and I had corrective surgery when I was younger. And she said, but my parents let me dance. And I'm learning to salsa. So that's why I put the salsa picture up there. I said, wow, I couldn't believe that she can salsa, because I can barely salsa, and I don't have tetralogy of Fallot. Now, she did tell us that she can salsa for 2 or 3 dances, and then the rest of the class can keep going, and she has to sit down and get a sip of water and relax. But then she's back out there again, and she's got her salsa skirt, and she's got her salsa shoes, and she's having a wonderful time. So I want to encourage you, let the boys do karate, let the girls do dance. This is something they need to have a bright future. Nobody should have to say, if only I could have done this, I would have been different. The importance of sports cannot be denied. However, I do want to make one statement. How many of you have children with hypoplastic left heart syndrome? Okay. They can't do everything. When they're younger, they're self-limiting. Alex is 14 years old now. He's not on a football team. He doesn't really have any interest in being on a football team, thank goodness. He'd rather be playing with his robots. And I'm really happy about that. But there are some restrictions, so you need to find out through the cardiologist what they can do. Alexander's cardiologist has said nothing where they have to run back and forth like on a football field, where they'll have other people putting pressure on them, and where a team is depending on them, and they may push themselves further than they would like to. He's not doing basketball. Thank goodness we live in Texas, so he doesn't do hockey. This is a big issue, though, for my friends who are Canadians. They live for hockey. And if you have HLHS, you can maybe do the little leagues. But once they get older, it's a lot more difficult. So do find out. And if you find out that there are going to be restrictions, substitute something like robotics or chess or video game creation. That's another thing that my son just absolutely loves. He can do that with his heart defect, and he can be equal to his peers. And sometimes we have to be creative when it comes to sports. Remember I told you Joey had to be the Red Ranger, or the Blue Ranger, and Alex had to be the Red Ranger. Well, after Joey got his second-degree black belt, he had to be on the swim team. So guess what little brother had to do? He had to be on the swim team. But there was a problem. And that is that when he'd get in the water, his lips would turn purple, his nose would turn blue, and he would start shaking violently. Well, we know that when you start shivering like that, it's not good for the heart, because your heart's having to work really hard. So now we'd have to drag him out of the water and warm him up, put a nice big warm towel around him and warm him up, and as soon as he was warm again, he wanted to be back in the water. It was exhausting. By the time 20 to 30 minutes was over, he would go lay down on a bench on those hard metal benches and fall sound asleep until his brother, who had an hour and a half practice, was finished. And I thought there's got to be a better way. And he couldn't qualify for the team with that kind of reaction. They have to be able to go so many yards back and forth. They can't get out and dry off and then keep going back in and back and forth. So I thought, what can I do? And it hit me, what about a wetsuit? So that's Alex in his wetsuit. But that wasn't the only problem Alex had. Alex didn't like water in his face. Okay? That's a perfect picture of Alex with his orange nose clip. That prevents the water from getting up in the nose. And he just had such an aversion to it, he could only do the backstroke. You cannot be on the swim team if you only do the backstroke. Let me tell you, at least not with Joey's coaches. They're not going to let it happen. But that orange plug did the trick. So between the wetsuit and the nose clip, he made the temple area swim club. And that was a very exciting time for him. Sometimes we have to be creative. Now, the team suit is not a wetsuit. But they were willing to make that accommodation. Nicole was talking about accommodations. He was able to swim the laps if he had that wetsuit. So if your child wants to do something and it looks like there's no way they can do it, be creative. That's when you go out to the bulletin boards that are out there, like on congenitalheartdefects.com, my website, I have a bulletin board. If you're having a problem or you have a question, post it. You'll have people from around the world who are willing to give you advice. And then they can have a bright future. They can join that team. They can be successful. At least we're going to try everything that we can to make it happen. I want to talk to you about a teenage young lady that I met on the internet named Jenny Sorensen. Okay, moms, remember I was talking about trust? Jenny was born with hypoplastic left heart syndrome in 1985. Her mother was a nurse and her grandmother was a nurse, so they felt capable to take care of her, but they didn't feel capable of saying goodbye and sending her off to summer camp by herself. How many of you can envision letting your heart child go off to summer camp without you? Oh, I have some takers. I have some other people who did it. Good for you. Good for you, because you know what? Jenny's mom let her do it. She found a special camp called Camp Del Corazon. There's a special camp here in Florida as well. There are camps all across the United States that are especially for children with heart defects. I'm sure Dr. Blanchard has a list for you and can give you some more information about that. This is a lifesaver. They have doctors there. They have nurses there. They have all the specialized people you know. They couldn't be in better hands. And they're with their peers. And they're doing all those fun things that kids want to do at summer camp. It was a turning point in Jenny's life. She went there and loved it so much, she went back every year, and guess what? Now she's a counselor at Camp Del Corazon. But if we want our children to grow up to be teenagers and then grow up to be adults, we have to talk to them about insurance. We have to let them know about their doctor's appointments. We have to get them used to getting their own medication, calling it into the pharmacy, becoming responsible for their own health care. In Canada, the health care is socialized. Do you know they looked at a spectrum of heart patients once they turned the age of 18? And here's what they discovered. Once those kids turned 18, the percentage of them who went to their annual cardiology visits dropped to 40%. But guess what went up? The number of emergency room visits. They were still having to see professionals, but not the way that we want them to. If we want them to have a bright future, we have to make sure they know what their benefits are. We have to make sure they know that they have to see their cardiologist on a regular basis. For my son, that means every 6 months. For some of you, it may be once a year. But it's not an option, is it? Is it an option for you? No. You make sure that your baby has his medications. You make sure he goes to the hospital when he needs to. You make sure you see Dr. Blanchard's smiling face at least once or twice a year, and he says everything's okay. Or maybe we need to adjust this medication. I don't know about you. My kid is getting bigger. He's now taller than I am. The medication he had when he was 5 is not appropriate now that he is the size of a young man. And so we have to keep up with those visits. If we want them to have a bright future, it's up to us to train them to become self-reliant. That's a hard thing for us moms who have done everything, who have kept those 3-ring binders, to all of a sudden hand over that 3-ring binder is a difficult thing to do. But if we start training them when they're young, Alex is 14 now. Last week he said, "Mom, I'm out of ditch." I said, "Good, call it in." And he did. I've trained him since he's been about 12 to know how to call in his own medication. He tells me, so I know I need to go pick it up because he's not driving yet. Not ready for that yet. It's bad enough I have Joey driving. But he knows what he needs to do. And I'm really glad, and he has to do it 2 weeks in advance. Don't tell me I'm out of ditch today. Sometimes that works. They close at 7 o'clock, but if he tells me at 8:30, it's not going to work. So 2 weeks in advance is my rule with him. And sometimes he misses, but he'll say, "Oh, we only have 11 days worth." That's acceptable. 8:30 at night is not so acceptable. I want to tell you about Karen McNulty. Have any of you seen this young lady's picture before? You may, if you start going out, let me mention this. Karen McNulty is the founder of the American Congenital Heart Association. She was born in 1975 with truncus arteriosus type 2. There was no surgery to help Karen, so she lived her life with uncorrected congenital heart defect. But her mother and her father, and her mother contributed to the heart of a mother, and her dad is contributing to the heart of a father, they treated her just like they did their 2 sons. She grew up with the same expectations on her that the brothers had. So she went to college and got her master's degree in library science. She worked as a librarian at Boston College. And as she grew older, she started to feel kind of isolated because she did have some issues. You were talking about job placement. It's harder to get a job when you have a heart defect and you're dealing with insurance issues, and companies may not want to hire you because they're afraid you're going to be sick too much and their insurance is going to go up because of you. And so she started to reach out to other people. Having a degree in library science, she was an expert at going on the internet, and she met people from all over the world. Well, one of the people that she met was James McNulty, and they ended up getting married. Aside from the American Congenital Heart Association, because none of us know what tomorrow holds. Pepper, I think we're ready to